Thumbs up if we can all see it. Yep, beautiful. Okay, so this is Data Insight, and the whole objective of today is to talk about, generally speaking, 5 ways that chaotic data is created in our CRMs and what the impacts of those are, and most importantly, 5 easy enough ways to start tackling all that stuff and start getting grips on our CRM data management so that we can actually have better performances across our whole organization. So going on to the next slide. Let's just do a quick round of intros, I guess. I suppose I'll start. So my name is Mykelti, and I'm the solutions consultant for the APAC region here at Validity. So a lot of my day is involved with talking with our customers on really weird use cases or complex scenarios as to ways that we can go about better managing their data governance. So I guess from here, I'll throw it over to Hansel.
Yeah, thanks, Mykelti. My name's Hansel, and I'm from a company called DCA, or Database Consultants Australia, and we're a data management and data consulting firm. Been operating in the local market for the last 30 years, and yeah, we help organizations solve complex data problems from data governance, data strategy, data quality, and many more. So yeah, looking forward to the session today. Thanks, Mykelti.
Beautiful. And over to you, Melissa.
Great, thank you. So yes, I'm Melissa Hill-Thompson. I am a senior systems analyst at Pearson. I am a part of the digital and technology team globally, and I sit under the Salesforce banner. We are notorious for having probably one too many Salesforce orgs, but I do sit with a particular team, and our team effectively covers several thousand users across our organisation. And Pearson themselves work in the education space. So as you can imagine, we have quite a lot of customer data. And we do have customers that range right down to those who are, in primary school, all the way up to customers who are doing their Pearson test of English to gain access to Australia.
Very nice. Welcome to the panel. And over to you, Andy.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'm Andy, and I'm from the New South Wales Land Registry Services. If you don't know what that is, it's basically anytime someone transacts with the land, so whether they're putting a mortgage on it, or if you're adding a caveat on it, or basically anything, or adding a lease, anything to do with land has to be recorded, and we're the registry that maintains those records, and I'm the Salesforce admin there.
Beautiful. Alrighty. And Andy, in a past life, did used to work with us over here at Validity. So that's where we met, and that's why she loves CRM data, right? Probably not. Alrighty, on to the next one. So just a quick agenda, as I mentioned at the top. Basically, we're going to cover quickly 5 culprits of chaotic data, how they're created, the impact of that stuff, and then we'll start going throughout the conversation, kind of a step to combating each of those types of problematic data sources. So on with it, with the first 5 culprits being managing data alone, so managing data in siloed rather than managing it in a team. Data hoarding, a really notorious one, and I'm very curious to hear your experiences with that, Andy and Melissa, when we get onto that one. Project-based or ad hoc data management, so treating data management as something you can turn off and on and just kind of get onto it when it becomes a big enough issue, and then leave it alone and letting it grow again. Unproductive end user experience, so essentially believing that our CRMs are built for our end users. They're really not. They're built for business processes, and the easier they are, or the harder they are in this case for end users to go about using it, the more likely it is that they will use it poorly, and that will just result in worse and worse data quality. And then lastly, just poor data quality, generally speaking, that kind of gremlin in the closet that starts to snowball, and the worse it gets, the harder it is to manage, and then it just kind of keeps growing and growing. So on to 5 ways to start calming that chaos and actually managing all of these different issues. We'll kick off with number 1. So the first problem being managing data in a silo. Let's talk about one of the best solutions to that, which is managing data as a part of a cross-functional team. So just as a quick bit of numbers, I guess, to help give some people context when they look back at this, is a study done by ObservePoint showed that businesses with a designated data management leader showed 42% greater confidence in data quality than those without. So it's kind of proof in the pudding that if you assign a designated leader, but you also manage that data from different perspectives, you will ultimately have better data governance as a whole. So why should we manage data as a part of a cross-functional team? We got some bullet points over here on the left, but I'd love to hear from the perspectives of everyone in this room as to why they believe that cross-functional data management is better to managing data in a silo. So Who'd like to jump in first?
I'm happy to go first. Since I think first thing to put out there for anyone who has come across Pearson or any of our brands, they will know that we are definitely global. We are certainly on the large side, and we are still learning every day. We are evolving in this space, especially when it comes to managing our data and who manages it. And we definitely do have a cross-functional team, but at the same time, we do have our own individual business groups who have their own, agendas, plans, strategies, motives, however you want to put it. So one of the biggest drivers for us is legal compliance. Pearson is first and foremost a company that comes out of the UK. So from a compliance point of view, we all try to drive towards the GDPR. But even when, you try and use that as like kind of your guiding light, things can, sometimes go a little bit sideways and be a bit shaky. So that's why I always say to people who I speak to, or to anyone who, wants to pick my brain, it's always an evolution in this space. You can never get it right on day one, and you probably won't get it right on day 100 or, 2 years later. You're always evolving and growing in this space. And I think in the Pearson space in particular, one of the things that we've really struggled with is the concept of actually having our customers in our platform once. And so with our cross-functional team that we have in place at the moment, one of their driving principles is that, you have this customer once in the platform, they have a single identity. So regardless of their touch point, whether it's like through an e-commerce aspect, or perhaps, they've done a test somewhere, or perhaps they're doing an assessment with us, we have that 360-degree view, which does kind of cut back on some of those data quality issues. And it does make it more trustworthy, because when you look up Joe Blogs is there once.
Yeah, absolutely. And because you are an international organization, I was curious about how you guys go about managing that data in terms of making sure that Australian best practices are met, as well as being best practices of each of those individual regions. For example, over in the UK, GDPR is a massive thing. Yeah. How do you guys go about managing that?
Yeah, so we do have a couple of different legal teams in place to help us with that piece. We have a data privacy office, and then we also have a security team, and then we also have, I guess what you would say, leads who kind of sit in the grey space, particularly when you can't, reach a VP or whatnot. And again, it's just, learning about our customers and evolving with them. So interestingly, we have had a couple of examples in the past few years where we've had customers in the APAC region, particularly from our Southeast Asia countries, query us here in Australia about how we manage their data. Perhaps they're affiliated to a higher ed institution, and how we meet our legal requirements and rules and regulations, when obviously Australia is a little bit more laid back than our counterparts off in the UK. And we always go back with that line of, we follow best practice as per our UK parent, which is the GDPR. And in some areas, it's even stricter again, particularly if we look to our teams in Canada. So we always just try and make sure we have that alignment, and we have those teams in place that, if there are any questions or concerns, anyone's feeling a bit fuzzy, we just go back to those teams, and we have that process in place where they can, confirm, check, and then come back to us. And it is across all of our Salesforce orgs, and it does include all clouds. So service, sales, and marketing are expected to follow those processes in place.
Very interesting. And what about you, Andy? Over on the land registry side, I imagine you guys have a bunch of regulations that you need to keep up to date with when it comes to managing your data.
Look, what's really interesting about this situation is that it's very typical of many government departments where you've got legacy databases, and for whatever reason, you may not be able to improve the integrations, you may not be able to improve the data quality, or you may not even have control of that database. This is just something you're going to have to roll with. So cross-functional data teams are incredibly important, because this is how you drive the quality forward. And look, Salesforce is a relatively new database for the land registry. That's one of the CRMs that we use. But to have this capability in place to be able to overlay and consolidate, that requires engagement within our own internal legal teams and within different data groups as well. And we're not even talking about the same type of data. This could be wildly different depending on what we're trying to achieve with the outcome there. So I would say that it's the biggest challenge. It's also the biggest opportunity, but it's something that's actually fairly common with these legacy databases, that you sort of got to take everybody on this journey to understand why it's important to have in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. Hansel, anything to add from yourself?
Yeah, so Melissa and Andy gave a pretty good overview from their side. When we assist organizations, just expanding on the points you've got there, Mykelti, the legal compliance is of course probably right at the top. As we know, the data breaches, it's more common than not. In terms of having a system like Salesforce, we know it's fairly secure, but in terms of business processes, how does data enter? How does it leave the system when we're looking at integration? It's really important to be on top of that. Now, we're not expecting our clients to be legal experts, but there are accredited courses like the ADMA Data Path, where you're able to train your staff on best practice data management, and that is aligned to things like Australian privacy principles and GDPR and so forth. So there's that as a starting point. Ensuring your data is useful for all departments. So what we're seeing is like Melissa's point, they might have multiple Salesforce instances. We see that they might be managing a complex ecosystem where there's all sorts of data. So it's important with the cross-functional teams to determine what data is important and should be utilized. And what we're seeing a lot as well is provisions for access. So certain sensitivity and role-based access for data, because we work with healthcare organizations where they have patient data where that can only be accessed by certain people. So how do you have the governance mechanisms? We know systems such as Salesforce are quite advanced, so you're able to do that. But how do you translate that to the different teams, and are they all on the same page? And the last three is pretty straightforward. We recommend demand tools to our clients, and that will help CRM and data quality clean. And of course, accurate reporting is one of the benefits from that. So those are just some of the points we look at when we look at governance and review with our clients.
Sure. Actually, that's a great point, because the first one that screams to me is, different teams will understand what data is actually important for whatever reason it may be. For example, someone in a sales department will obviously know front-end stuff when it comes to directly getting more deals, whereas someone over the legal side or someone over the regulatory side will have very different perspectives about very different data. But yeah, to the point of, say, in the healthcare space, you're right. There would have to be end users that just simply can't see some stuff, as opposed to other teams that need access to that different information. So absolutely, for sure. Alrighty, from here, let's jump over onto don't hoard your data. So this is a classic mistake that, not even a mistake, it's a challenge. It's a challenge that's always an evolving challenge for pretty much every organization, because naturally, and I think we all understand this, you would want to hoard data, because just from a simple sales or marketing perspective, it gives you a whole bunch of information about those customer profiles that you might be able to dip back into many, many years down the line. However, at what point do you have to decide we should really be cutting our losses here, because hoarding this data is not just a security issue when it comes to a breach, in terms of if you were to get hacked and you got this data that really shouldn't have been hanging on to anymore, but also it does drive up storage costs, and it makes data governance more difficult because of the sheer quantity that you're just consistently building up over time. But I'd love to hear from the perspectives of both you and Melissa and Andy here, because I have a feeling Land Registry will have a very different perspective on hoarding data versus a typical organization, or a more typical organization like Pearson, for example. Who wants to jump in first?
I think Melissa should jump in first, because I think what my view is going to be like the total opposite. So
it is an interesting space, and it's funny. I think depending on who you speak to, and obviously touching back previously on that cross-functional team, you then do find when it comes to hoarding, the behaviours change depending on who you're dealing with. Are you dealing with a sales rep? Are you dealing with, someone who's executing an email and a marketing campaign, or even on the customer service side? So, I mean, again, it is something that in the Pearson space, we always talk about how we are evolving to do better. We're always improving our processes, our policies, and thankfully we haven't had a breach that I know of. But it is a challenge, because I guess there's kind of that very fine line of too much and not enough, particularly on how you want to use your customer data. And obviously, there are the implications of cost and legal compliance, and interestingly, on the cost side, we are frequently trying to find stuff to purge because our orgs are too full. So it is a balancing act. There is the impact of actually taking out too much from the platform, particularly in the Pearson space. We want to be able to track the life cycle of our customer. So in some ways, yes, we do have to hold a fair bit. If a customer started their Pearson journey, maybe they were a high school student and they bought our science book, and then by the end of their university degree, you know, they've got a PhD in whatever it is, like, you know, you want to see that full end-to-end journey to better understand our customers. But for some, that might just be a bit too much, and it could be considered hoarding. So it is trying to balance, you know, how much you need, how much you don't need. And obviously, yes, there is a very big legal consequence if, you know, you do have a breach and you just have far too much. So again, in our space, we do have our legal and security teams constantly reviewing our retention periods. We do have that whole process set up in place to obviously protect our customers as well as Pearson. But again, yeah, it's always evolving. What's the best way to manage, you know, large chunks of data, particularly when you are looking at what could look more like hoarding rather than, you know, a productive data set working away for you.
And for you guys, obviously, I don't think you want to share or could share the ins and outs of which you decide to keep and what you don't keep, but what's the thought mentality or the process that goes behind trying to have a methodology to determine what sort of stuff is important and valuable and what you should retain and what stuff you should probably it's time to let go?
Yeah, so I think that's probably a very touchy subject in the organisation, depending on who you're talking to, especially if you want to talk to a customer service or a sales rep. I think it's a bit of give and take. Like, I think when our retention periods started to come into play and they are all, you know, sitting in the background ticking away, you know, the first spot that you do notice the data changing, whether it's in size, scope or shape, is in the reporting that we do. And so, you know, they have had to make adjustments over time. Perhaps they've taken too much customer data away, or maybe on the sales side too much has gone. So it is, I guess, a case of, you know, when the retention periods are ticking along, review, has too much been taken away, not enough, and then coming back to the drawing board with all the different teams. But a lot of this is very much controlled by our legal and security teams, and in some ways our actual Salesforce users don't really get a say in the matter because, frankly, they get a little bit carried away. Let's be honest. The average sales rep wants to keep everyone. The average marketing person probably wants an even bigger database. So yeah, so quite often, and again, kind of pertains back to some of the stuff I was saying in the previous slide, our legal and security teams do get that final say, but they are always, you know, open to conversations, reviewing retention periods, working out where, you know, is that right kind of boundary for too much versus not enough.
Yeah, for sure. So kind of all ties, and I think a lot of these points that we'll discuss today all kind of tie together, like having a cross-functional team is a better way to manage data hoarding in a kind of a happy medium where, well, not everyone's going to be stoked, but everyone's not going to be totally unhappy with it. And I guess that's the best you can strive for. And then what about you, Andy, on your side? Because I would have to imagine you guys would have to store a lot more data than the average organization.
Well, this is where it gets a bit interesting. So, you know, the Land Registry Services is one of the oldest institutions in New South Wales, therefore Australia as well. We have over 150 years worth of data because every single transaction of every single piece of land has to be recorded, and all of the surrounding data that's around that. So in some respects, we are all hoarding. We are hoarding all the data. We want it all. But that's part of the remit. So really it's a responsibility because your client it's different to a traditional customer. You're not transacting in the same way. So every single citizen in New South Wales is your customer. You have some variation of data on them or something that impacts them, because everybody lives in a house. Would hold fingers crossed you would be, unless something's gone horribly wrong for you. But even then, you know, there's still an impact to that land. It's still about how do you manage that data responsibly, sustainably, and in a way that's going to have the right level of access for the individual. We talk about data in, you know, the tangible sense of marketing platforms, and yes, we've just started doing that. But again, our interaction is different again, because it's more of an announcement, you know, relationship building in a more approachability way. So it's a really challenging space to work in, and data hoarding, as far as the strategy has to be, is played out quite differently in this space. But I do feel, you know, the consequences of a data breach go up exponentially the longer you have this data. And when you're sitting on 150 years of it, you're very, very aware of that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine, Hansel, from your side, seeing as you guys are data experts and you work in governance and managing all this stuff for customers, you must have come across some pretty bizarre use cases in your time.
Well, yeah, we talk about this all the time with every client that we work with, essentially. In terms of the data hoarding, a couple of use cases is prevalent, especially when we're transitioning as part of a digital transformation project. We find that some clients' data goes back 30, 40, 50 years. And then there's always, even sometimes from the top, there's that view that, no, we don't want to lose all of it. They're all our customers. And then we'll do an analysis and we say, well, your active customers are this, but we've actually found 70% of the data set, they haven't interacted with you in 20 years. Like, do you really want to keep them in your data set? There's many of those types of conversations. And if we do move to Salesforce, like, we love Salesforce as an example, but driving up storage costs is a valid point. It can be quite costly, and if you're not communicating and they're not interacting with you, is there really value in having that in there? And of course, we would look at the strategies in terms of what should be retained in the CRM. But yes, it's a very common problem that we view. General rule of thumb is, if they're engaging with you and interacting with you to an agreed business rule of what's active, any interrelations they have with you, whether it's, of course, some transactions or activities, then yes, let's keep them. But anything outside of that, then we may put them on a nurture strategy, and maybe even take them out of the CRM and either put them on a data warehouse or delete them completely, which is a very difficult for companies to let go of that. So we have to be mindful when we're having those conversations. And kind of warm them up to that idea first. It's the whole process, but yes,
Well,
everything that
a lot of stress and a lot of sweating when they're holding their cursor over the delete button, right?
Yeah. Yes, pretty much.
Do you have a general rule of thumb that you typically recommend for your customers to follow when it comes to they haven't interacted in X amount of time, it's probably time to let them go, or is it very much case by case?
Yeah, it depends on the industry. So some industries have a legislation that they have to keep certain data points, and then in terms of the retention based on years, again, it's different for different industries. Where some industries you have to retain for 7 years. So even if someone's not active for 6 years, you have to retain them. So it really will be on an industry legislation, as well as the broader, of course, broader privacy implications. But yeah, it will depend on a case by case basis. But typically, a very high level rule of thumb for us is, if they're active and they're engaged, yes, let's keep them. Again, to an agreed business rule with the client, whether that's 12 months, 24 months, 7 years, maybe even longer, and then any interrelated data points that provides value for you, let's keep them. But then anything outside of that, if you don't want to lose them, then typically what we would recommend is, let's set up a nurture re-engagement, see if they still want to be in your database, and if they don't respond, then let them go because of the data breach. Like, we know the Optus scenario, people that signed up 15 years ago were part of that breach. We don't want that. So I say, if they don't want to let them go, what we're recommending to our clients and what they're doing is they're doing a reconnect and re-opted in. And then we give them a certain time frame, and then you have to let them go after that if they don't re-opt in. That's just a few different examples of how we would tackle it. And you've got data archive there, which is where the warehousing comes in, actually. So.
Sure. And I was curious, on the lines of Optus and Medibank and whatnot that did unfortunately have those breaches. I know Melissa or Andy have, since that incident, there been extra protocols, extra thought put in place for either of you guys in your organizations around protecting your customer data privacy and protecting yourselves from a potential breach?
I'm happy to jump in. interestingly, when the Optus breach happened, the next day, all our machines went through a very strict security update, and it felt like half the platform was locked down. I was like, is this a coincidence? But I mean, I think the juggle for Pearson is obviously because we are a global company, and even myself, like I support a lot more North American teams than I even do in APAC at the moment. It's always trying to effectively keep up. Like obviously there were breaches here in Australia, and there's breaches in different countries and, you know, different cities just about every day at the moment. So I think it would be fair to say that our legal and security teams, you know, review all the breaches that do happen, that do have touch points into us. And then they do adjust accordingly, whether it's, you know, even something as simple as what browser we can go into, or if we all require additional security training or data privacy training. And then sort of moving forward from there. As I say, we're always evolving in Pearson as the best way forward. And so, yeah, I would say our teams are definitely across all the different breaches. They probably just have a bit of a deep dive as into whether or not it has a touch point back into Pearson, and if there's anything we need to be cognizant of. But I would say our security team are definitely across it. And as I said, the next day Optus happened and it was like, oh, we can't log in for 5 minutes. I was like, this is great timing. We were really efficient that day.
And I'll just expand on that. Really, is just a lot of this stuff was already in play. Obviously, being aware of it being a registry service, it was a #1 priority in any case. But I think what an interesting response, and it's not just isolated to us, but really just a layered strategy approach. So thinking about the type of data, the way that people are interacting with them, and applying the best possible security platform around those interactions are definitely the way that it has been shifted. We're thinking about data in a different way, not just this amalgamous cloud of data. It's really getting specific into where it's coming from, who's responsible, and how do we best manage it from the customer and from internal perspectives.
Yeah, for sure. All right, now I think that's a good point to get on to the next one. Profiling your data. So speaking of getting to know your data and understanding why is it important, what's important about it, etc. This is kind of a really critical one to preventing issues like data hoarding, or to preventing issues like just letting your data kind of just go awry. If you don't know what you don't know, which I've got on the next slide, you don't really know where to begin or what's wrong, or even what your data quality looks like right now. And from my perspective, when I'm talking to new customers in the data governance side of things, this is typically the biggest first challenge, is that they just don't know the scope of what their issues actually are. They have an idea, generally speaking, that yes, they have a lot of duplicates, or they might have a lot of unstandardized data, or they have this issue where they've got a ton of leads that they can't figure out how to, say, sunset those leads and just use contacts, etc., because they don't just know the scope of the challenge that they're actually facing. So that's, I think, a really, really critical step as a part of cross-functional data management. It's also, once you kind of establish that cross-functional team, one of those priorities should be profiling your data to actually understand what the current situation is and what needs to be done about it. So I guess over to either of you, whoever wants to kick off first, what is your approach to profiling your data across your CRMs to understand what you actually need to take care of and what it actually looks like right now?
I can jump in first this time, Melissa. Well, there you go.
You can jump in.
In this case, I think it's an interesting question. Is what defines success can be very, very different for different departments. In what is quality, like when we're classifying it, what is a success data quality success program look like, and really sticking a number on it and being quite aggressive with them was the best place to start. Again, it was this liminal data question mark space where we didn't even know what categories the data fell into, how people were interacting with them, and what was important and what was prioritized data. So coming back to those really fundamental questions, and this is where you have to be really hard with the executives and actually be really tough with people and go, hey, nuts and bolts, what do you need to make your job work? And really bringing it down back to a systems approach, getting these KPIs out of the teams and then building data quality programs out of that was just the easiest and quickest way to build a path forward, because it's so easy to just look at the data and go, where do you even start?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, I like that. The idea of getting KPIs from each different department or each different team to understand what things matter. Yeah, great approach. Way to put ones and zeros on something that is largely qualitative. What about you, Melissa?
Yeah, so this is actually quite an interesting space for Pearson at the moment. So in our current structure, we actually sit almost like 5 separate business groups. And so as 5 groups, they all try to profile their data, which is interesting when they all share their customers. So, I think, again, as a global company, we're sort of still learning the best way forward in this piece. Some groups certainly have it nailed down. They know how they want to understand their data, address their issues, look at their data flows and all that. But I think one of the biggest, key things that globally we've worked on, and we are certainly improving on every day, is the fact that we do have Service Cloud, Sales Cloud, and Marketing Cloud, as well as all the other bits and pieces hanging off to the side, and that we are trying to get our teams to understand that when they use the data, input the data, extract it, whatever it is they're doing, in the process of profiling it as well, they're all touching the same data points. So we've actually had to educate our service teams on what happens in the sales space, and the marketing teams what happens in the service space, because once we actually started to join the dots in that space, our marketing users in particular started to understand why the data presented itself the way it did up in Marketing Cloud. And then it was the same for our service and sales users as well, rather than kind of just wandering around aimlessly and doing things in their little silo in their own cloud in whichever org we had. When the 3 groups were far more aligned, when it came to, particularly tackling data quality issues, they were all effectively on the same page. So then they could, as you say, reach those KPIs, reach those targets. And if they, had like an end goal, a lot of the times it was, tied to a larger marketing campaign. And then when they all started to kind of, work in the same direction, then they could see like the end result and why it was successful. And it's effectively because they're all on the same page. But it's a very big space to tackle. And like, particularly in Pearson, because the size of our company, because of the spread of our customers, I don't know if we'll ever get it to 100%, but I know that, we have the drive from the users and we have the tools. So it's always a case of, whatever the plans are for today, once we've, actioned and put that in place for whether it's a few weeks or a few months, we then need to go revisit that. What were the end results? Did we, reach the targets that we were aiming for? Did we make the revenue that we were after? And then where do we need to adjust so that we can continue to, profile our data and address these dot points altogether holistically?
Yeah, for sure. And Hansel, from your perspective, having worked with a wide array of customers, I'd love to hear what your kind of approach is, because I'm assuming you guys must have a strategy when you're going in with a new customer about how you're going to start handling, I guess, everything on the project that's kind of kicked everything off. And one of the first steps would have to be understanding what the current situation is. What's your approach over at DCA and tackling to like understand what you don't know?
Yeah, we've got a defined process, but if I was to summarize it in a short sense, we would look for existing documentation. If they exist, then that's a big if. We find that the general questions we would ask is, are there business rules documents? Is there a data dictionary? Have you defined your data in a data glossary? Do you have an ERD diagram for your system or systems? And do you know what your high level data model is? And to be honest, more often than not, there's nothing. So what we would do is we would either help produce those assets for the organizations or lean to their experts, because they all have it in their minds, and help them produce those as a starting point. Very critical for us for someone like us to understand the landscape. And then once we get to that point, so that one is more enterprise-wide. If we're looking at business units and departments, and especially around data quality issues, we're looking at the granular things such as the validity of the information in your contact base. So that's things like phone numbers, emails, addresses, etc. We know that you could get profiling tools out there. We know Demand Tools does that. We can profile and tell you what's valid or not, but outside of utilizing tools, you already have that information in your systems. You may just not be reporting or looking at it. So for example, if you've had your CRM for 20 years or 10 years, but some people have opted out, for example, then have an audit of that and see the numbers of that. If you're communicating to someone via email, then your email platform will tell you who's invalid through your bounce backs and also unsubscribes. And if you're doing tele campaigns or you have a call center, then people should be marking in your system, what numbers they can't connect to. And with addresses, if you are still sending mail, which we know is prevalent in only small amount of industries, so utilities and those types of companies still do when they send bills. Finance organizations, not-for-profits will still send direct mail campaigns to get you to fundraise. There will be a good proportion that will be coming back to you or to your mail house as a return to sender. So again, there's information there, that data is no longer valid. Are you capturing that and updating your CRM? So we would look at that as well. Outside of automated ways to do it, we would recommend ways for companies to be able to set their foundation by profiling and auditing with what they have today. And of course, we know there's tools that like the amount tools that can do it.
Yeah, that's, I think, the cheat approach. But yeah, aside from using a tool to just quickly give you a profile of your data, it's still important to do the background homework. I mean, it's like trying to jump the stairs without having trained for it. You still need to do the steps and the background and the homework to be actually do this more effectively and have a long-lasting approach. All right, from here, we'd love to jump onto, don't assume that business systems make data entry and usage easy. So what we mean by that is business systems like CRMs aren't really created for the end user. They are created for business systems and processes in the background, which means that they're not always user-friendly. Even something as powerful as Salesforce is still not the most user-friendly tool for someone that's, say, working in a role like sales or service or marketing, what have you, which is why so many of them end up using, for example, like we got in this second point here, spreadsheets. Even in the world of today, where it's not the 90s anymore, you still have plenty of reps using spreadsheets, even though they've got really sophisticated and robust engines like Salesforce sitting right there, because it's simply not a user-friendly product a lot of the time for a lot of parts of their day. So what I'd like to understand from you guys is, what is your approach? Well, I guess, is this a challenge that you see, whether it's not just sales, but other departments across your organizations? Is it not user-friendly? And are you seeing the impact of people not enjoying using that interface? And I guess, how do you go about trying to improve that so that the more easy something is to use, generally speaking, the better people use it and the better the data quality will be long-term? Andy, what about you, coming from a really old legacy system with 150 years worth of data behind it?
Look, I think it's an interesting situation where you've got this idea that this technology and data is something that is IT and robots and completely separate to me. But I think at its fundamental, it's a human problem. It's a human issue. And anytime you have a human involved, there's going to be I wouldn't, to be kind about it, a wide range of inputs, let's put it that way. So what people feel they want to input and what is required for reporting, those are two different opinions on how they want to see and interact with that data. So it's actually bringing it back to its fundamental and going, again, what is it you're trying to achieve? What's the goal? What are we, if you have a directive or a strategy that you need to implement and you have other people that need to execute on that, what are the steps? And really bringing it back down to basics. What are you trying to get out of this situation? And then you build your data model and your kind of quick and easy wins, something as simple as a screen flow where you can't get it wrong. It's literally A, B, C. We can't mess this up, but we can only get there once we understand the roles. We understand how they're interacting with the internal team, with the external people that are interacting with. And then as a sort of tertiary layer on top of that, there's a big disconnect, I think, between what the company can feel as a strategy, as a way forward, that may change. And that doesn't always get reflected back to where the engine of this data is actually kicking off. So making sure that your boots on the ground and your leaders are on the same page of what they need from this machine. You know, it's so, I don't know about Melissa and Hansel, you're probably going to laugh when I say this, but, you know, it's not just a magic box. I can't just shake it and something better is going to come out. We have to, there's a lot more involved in this. And getting them to understand that is really, I feel, at the guts of where most of this is going wrong.
I was going to say, I shake that box every day, just hoping for something myself. I was like, please. Look, I will say that these 2 points definitely hit the nail on the head for Pearson. Globally, each time we do an onboarding, we ourselves are still learning the best way to just even onboard our users into our platform. And one of the tricky parts that we are still trying to, how shall I put this, remedy, is that we have overcooked one of our main instances of Salesforce that the bulk of our company use. So it does make it difficult. And that's where you see that, you know, sales reps are going back to spreadsheets, because when they then just go to use the platform for daily use, they want to pop in a contact or update their pipeline, and there's like an extra 10,000 fields sitting there. Obviously, that's a bit extreme, but you know, their screen is cluttered. There are things there they don't understand. They're like, why do I now have a pick list that has an extra 20 options and yesterday it had 5? So one of the biggest things we struggle with in Pearson is, you know, we have a lot of great ideas, but it's trying to bring them all back to a central point, combine them all and get the best out of it without, you know, our 5 key business groups all having a different version of role for a contact, or a different way to create a case, or a different way to, you know, push out a campaign, for example. So we do find that we do have that portion of reps that we have onboarded into our Salesforce orgs, and particularly our main one. And yes, they do revert back to spreadsheets, because in their mind, they probably think it's less admin, it's more intuitive, when in fact, we've given them all the tools to make the most of our Salesforce orgs. But I think for them, it's kind of like a big, scary place that has far too many things going on the screen. And they're just like, no, I shall back away. And then interestingly, on the human error side, I think that reluctance to use the platform and defaulting back to our old tools is where we get the human errors, because there's a bit of cut and paste going on, or someone's rushing, or, you know, they're not taking the time to just focus on that one task at hand. And so obviously for us, because we have the full suite of tools, you know, one little error at one end can filter all the way through to the other end. So we juggle with these 2 exact problems just about every day, I think. And we're still working out, you know, the best way to address them, but more than that, to make our users feel comfortable in the platform, but to also just put their hand up and say, hey, this just isn't working for me. You know, I'm creating errors because this page layout is, you know, something completely remote from how I work and how I operate in my space. And, you know, how do we bring the 2 back together? So
yeah, I think that's a great point. There's definitely, I think, 2 main prongs, I guess, that cause a lot of these issues. Is one is end user training. Like, obviously, if someone is untrained to use the platform, they're not going to know how to use the platform. And especially the more complicated you make it, the more it's like, I don't know what's going on here. And then the second one is that kind of disconnect between people that are managing Salesforce or developing Salesforce and building it up, and then the people that are the, you know, the end users that are using it like every single day just for this specific task. And then they start seeing all this stuff showing up, like you mentioned, and then they're like, okay, now I'm just going to do the spreadsheet thing now. Yeah, absolutely true. Sorry, Hansel, I think I jumped in front of you there.
No, that's all right. I mean, like, yes, similar with Melissa and Andy, we see this all the time to this day. You know, with spreadsheets, like every transformation project we do, you know, whether it's CRM focused, ERP focused, data warehouse focused, we always ask the question, you know, is there spreadsheets that we don't know about? You know, someone will say no, and then, like, you know, a day later, oh, actually, we found something. So we found a bunch of spreadsheets that's not in our systems, and we're like, yeah, no, we expected that. So yeah, and you know, whether it's sales or whether it's other functions, it's prevalent across the board. We see Excel reporting, which is quite good, to be fair, but we still see people running reports from Excel. It's like, why are you doing that? You've got Power BI. So it's very, very, very common. And the human error is there's no way you can get around that. I mean, you can have sufficient training, you can have validation rules and data quality rules that's enforced by an administrator or a data owner. But even with all of that, you just can't get away from it. You can't validate every single field and reject the record. People will import data. You'll have a front end website where you've got customers entering details on an application or doing payment transactions and they type their name wrong. There's just many examples of that. So that can be alleviated with data quality tools, of course. But the best way to tackle those is the training, user adoption, creating validation rules, but you won't be able to 100% eliminate it. It's a day-to-day thing that all of us are dealing with. So you just need to have the mechanisms, ideally, to be able to remediate it when they come in. So
yeah, absolutely right. I talk to plenty of Salesforce admins or developers or architects that insist that human error can't happen anymore because I've got all these restrictions and I've got all these required fields and it's not free form text anymore. They have to choose a pick list. I'm like, look, to quote Jurassic Park, life will find a way. If you have an entry source of data, people, especially to stereotype here that work in a world like sales, will find the path of least resistance to get that data in there so that they can close that opportunity off. So you have to expect that it will happen.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Can I expand on that too? Is just totally radically thinking differently about data management in pushing it back into the sources. One thing is that you may have lots of pools of customer data coming from different sources. There's no need necessarily for your customer to have to continually repeat their information because they get it wrong, like the amount of times they've put their own email address in wrong, but potentially I already have their record anyway through previous interactions with us. That small thing was a game changer, where if I can avoid a rep putting in information or the customer putting information, that is the gold. I don't want anybody to give me any more data if possible.
For sure. Alrighty, so just before we move on, this is where we give ourselves our small little just example of all of this stuff. So looking at a Salesforce screen, obviously we've discussed it to an admin or to an architect or someone that works on the data side. All this makes complete sense and there's no reason why it wouldn't be used. But then you look at this from the perspective of someone that maybe doesn't have the same level of training, and a spreadsheet just seems so much easier. And this is where we plug in, the validity side of things. We do have a product that helps streamline all this stuff called Grid Buddy, but basically you're dropping a spreadsheet into Salesforce so that you can let your reps use a spreadsheet, except it's native and intuitive inside Salesforce, so that data management follows all the appropriate flows and you don't have all these siloed weird spreadsheets coming back into the system. Now, on to quick win number 5. This is where we talk about, I guess, tools and other solutions, but yeah, invest in tools to manage and automate data quality processes. And it's not just, talking about ourselves or just talking about DCA. It's talking about actually you do sometimes need to spend money to make money, and sometimes you do need to go out and invest in quality infrastructure to make your systems work, because you can't expect it to just work on its own. So I guess aside from, say, us directly, I'd like to hear from the perspectives of our panelists here as to what sort of tools that they needed to look for. What kind of criteria have they needed to look for? How do they go about identifying what they need to fix whatever problem that they have? So who would like to jump in first?
We all jumping in? I'm happy to get started because this is actually quite an interesting space in Pearson. So Pearson have a lot of tools for a lot of things. We have a lot of technology, probably a bit too much at this moment. And we ourselves are still finding the right tool to manage and automate all our data quality processes. We definitely have a few in some of our platforms, and they certainly do the job as prescribed, but there is always that human element we find that we still have to put forward resources to, finish it off. So whether we're handling duplicates, whether we're, tidying up a list of contacts, even reviewing like some of our retention periods or whatnot, there is always a human element still at Pearson. And so we do have a group who's looking at, you know, how we can, whether we build them in-house or we go out and purchase it, you know, these tools to help us manage our data in a much more succinct way. But I think one of the challenges we currently face is that the sheer volume of data that we get, obviously from the size of Pearson, but also from the multiple locations. So we still have a bit of an issue, you know, in our e-com space, which is great at duplicating our customers. So by the time it arrives to our ERP, customer one is now times 4. So, you know, we're still like even trying to deal with kind of that outlier of our landscape as well. But one of the tools we have actually invested in the last couple of years is the CDP. A portion of our marketing team do use that, and that seems to really be quite a big turning point for our marketing teams, just being able to pull in the fact that we still do have numerous sources. Granted, they all flow into, you know, one location, whether it's the CDP or perhaps Marketing Cloud for us. For them, it gives them that next level of visibility that allows them to, you know, move down that path of automation and then really focus more on the pieces that they care about, which drive their strategy, which is, you know, how does this journey look? How does this content present? You know, what kind of automations do we need to flow off our campaigns? So it's always about, for us anyway at Pearson, is first finding the right tool that can handle the sheer size of us, and then, you know, slowly just starting with a small group and then rolling it out to the wider audience in Pearson. But definitely a work in progress with us. Always will be, I think. I don't think there is, you know, a tick and we're ever going to be done. I think we'll always be revisiting this topic to see how we can improve and see what new tools are out there, because it seems like every day there's something new that's becoming available to use.
That's the right approach, though. If you're looking at it like, oh, we've got our solution, we can set and forget forever now. I mean, that's when mistakes happen, and that's when you become archaic. If you stop looking for things, then yeah, for sure. And then what about you guys, Andy? Being such an old institution, is it harder for you guys to get approval for new solutions or new tools?
Oh, it's a 2-year process. It's yeah, it's a long journey. And it also makes the role of Salesforce admin incredibly difficult, because the short answer, I can't use tools. By the time I get approval, the impact of that data quality it's not worth thinking about, and I have to do a lot of kind of like manual labor. So my entire motivation is to get in front of it and to go, okay, well, what can we possibly do to limit the potential of this happening? So any new deployment has to be fully planned out. Every time we've got a web form or you know, marketing's got a bright idea, we have to go back and plan every single step. So even though there's an internal process that'll be on this kind of legal regulatory side, that there's nothing I can do about that. It's actually changes the strategy, and we're so much more involved with that boots on the ground with anyone that wants to interact with that data, because we can't afford any poorly executed plan. It has to be watertight from the get-go.
Mm. Yeah, I think a very different challenge for you from what most organizations would expect, to be honest.
Yeah. Yes, but you know, it's forced me to become a better admin. It's forced me to think in a very different way, and prevention is worse than cure. It will spend so much less in the planning stage and a really careful deployment, lots more testing, and you know, we'll go out. One of the things we'll try and do is we'll set out a scenario and go, okay, what can I do to mess this up? How can I take this beautiful sandbox environment and destroy it? How can I make as many duplicates as possible? And then don't do that.
Love it. Prepare for the worst and hope for the best.
It's much easier to break something and then use that learning than it is to try and build a watertight system.
For sure, for sure. And like, I also see that from the perspective of buying new solutions. Obviously, we are a sales organization and this is our end objective, but I also see acquiring new solutions as a way not just to make things easier and better and more efficient, but it's also a way to mitigate risks. Because if you don't have a way to actually have strong data governance, that's when you start exposing yourself to the earlier topics we discussed, like data hoarding or in risk of a breach or not meeting government or governance requirements, etc. But Hansel, from your perspective, where does that sit for you guys?
So yeah, for data quality tools and processes, again, it's something we see all the time. Probably we would recommend to take a step back. Do you have you define your data quality? Do you understand the issues in play? Like, is it an address issue or is it a duplicate issue? What's the core data quality issue? That could be a combination of above. And then we would look at what systems and technologies you already have. In some cases, it may be an enhancement of business rules and processes for your CRM, coupled by a tool specifically for that CRM that will tackle it. But if we're talking, a common use case for us is organizations will have multiple systems that are trying to talk to each other. Then in that scenario, is it worthwhile investing on an MDM solution? Maybe, maybe not. They can be quite expensive. So, and as to everyone's point, there's so many tools out there. We would have to find the best fit for purpose for your environment, but that first comes with understanding how bad or how good your data quality is. Because if it's quite good, then maybe you can live with updating processes and working out of the box functionality, which many of the modern systems have. If we need to do more than that, then yes, let's implement something else. But yeah, we would start with just understanding and making sure the client understands their issue, because if your data quality is pretty good, why would you invest tens of thousands of dollars when you can fix that with a simple tweak of your environment? So again, it depends on the use case, but we would definitely we would definitely recommend data quality tools, because for the most part, you can set something, for example, Salesforce out of the box data quality in Dedupe, but it's not enough. So that's where demand tools comes in, for example.
And actually, a question I do have, and I'd love to ask everyone here is, one of our biggest challenges with the people that we talk to day to day is that the person we are ultimately talking to, our champion, like the Salesforce admin, the architect, the dev, they completely understand the importance of having high quality data and systems to manage that. Their greatest challenge when we're having that conversation with them is trying to convince the person above them or above them or above them or the C-suites, oh, we need to drop X amount of dollars on this because it's important, and trying to get that person way up there that has got very little interaction with Salesforce or whatever CRM they might be using. Oh, but the data's fine. Like it'll be fine. Is it working? Yeah, it's working, but no, then it's fine. Do you have any tips from any of your perspectives on how to help these people that know that they need something better, they know that they need a solution, trying to convince the people up above them?
I could probably go first on that one, because we see this all the time. You pull through what executives are looking for is of course legal compliance legislation. That is near the top, and then the other one is revenue ultimately, and the data quality impacts both of those. So we know that a data breach, you just put the fear in them, like, Woolworths got fined close to $2 million with a data breach, and that they could have actually stopped that by having better processes in place. In terms of revenue, well, what's a customer worth for you? What's your top customers worth for you? If the data quality is eroded over time, you're losing that opportunity. Whether it's a portion of customers or the whole lot, if they're able to define what a customer is worth, the lifetime value of that customer, or a prospect, they don't have to be a customer, but there might be a prospect in the data set where, you've profiled it and you go, these types of customers, they turn in this amount of revenue to the organization. Now, if that data quality is old and not maintained, that's potentially lost revenue as well. So I would start with legal and the revenue. They start
with fear of God and then go to the tax man.
yeah, $2 million fine. Like, how can compared to a very minute investment in a data quality tool. So
yeah, for sure. Either of you guys have any perspectives on this?
I was going to say I do the same thing.
Fair enough.
So our executive management group, absolutely, the legal ramifications are kind of the first thing that comes to their mind. Obviously, for where our legal entities are based, the fines can be quite large. We can leave it at that. But yeah, the other thing as well is proving the revenue. So when we have had some really successful marketing campaigns that come off the back of the state of the customer data, particularly in our English language learning space, when we've been able to show that to our leadership team, you know, equating the customer data to the success of the campaign, to the revenue that's come back into the company, just seeing it on a simple slide, seeing those numbers really does help them, you know, kind of join the dots. So we have found probably in the last couple of years, especially with our new CEO, Andy Bird, he has a huge emphasis on customer data, and that has definitely filtered through a lot of our leadership and our executive team, and it's obviously coming up from our Salesforce people as well. And so, yeah, I think it would be fair to say, as a business, as a corporation, or however you want to put us, we are definitely all on the same page. But yes, usually we start with that legal aspect to kind of get their attention, but then we always back it up with the evidence and the proof that we do in fact know what we're talking about. And, you know, I find as well, when we have our users, whether it's service sales and marketing, when they also play a role in kind of pushing the importance of this, it actually makes our leadership team kind of pay attention. It's not just us technology people saying we need a new toy that's all flashy and whatnot, but it's actually our users who are showing, well, if you give me X, I can produce Y. And if Y, you know, sees a substantial jump in revenue, then it does make them sort of, you know, give it a second thought and go, okay, well, if this group's asking, then we need to, you know, give it some thought and some consideration.
For sure. And I think we are just coming up to the hour now. So I think we'll probably leave it there, and I'll stop sharing my screen. But I do want to say a massive thank you to each and every one of you for jumping on today and giving your perspectives and your experiences and all of this stuff. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed sitting on the panel with us and talking, nerding out a little bit on some data stuff.